and we'll discuss that with our 5 speakers. Thank you to the 5 of you for being with us to shed light on the matter. First, Mark Baumgartner. You if IFATCA coordinator, that's the International Federation for Air Traffic Controller Associations. Ludovic Berliou, you're head of Aerospace France at AXA XL. Thomas Bessières, CEO and founder of InFact. We'll see later what you do. Clarisse Pamiès, you're also a founder and CEO of OMind Neurotechnologies. And Xavier Dejabrin, VP of Insurance Risk Management at Thales Group. Thank you to the 5 of you to talk about this exciting subject. First, a word with you, Ludovic Berliou. AXA XL has been helping airlines and OEMs and air traffic controllers and civil aviation and aerospace. You have an entity, AXA Research Fund, carrying out research with the Higher Institute for Aeronautics and Space in Toulouse. Could you first shed light on the content of the research project developed there in terms of neuroscience? Thank you very much, Stephanie. Well, with Thomas here, we are honored to spend these few minutes with you, maybe to frame the subject, Stephanie. I think that air transport can legitimately be very proud, as can the entire ecosystem, to be one of the industries which over the last 50 or 60 years has made the most progress in terms of safety. I won't bore you with facts, but the accident rate was divided by a factor of 100, and now Christophe earlier talked about 4 billion, nearly 5, maybe 6 billion passengers transported every year in the world. We're an industry that is the safest means of transport as we speak in a globalized world. Now our challenge is always to go forwards and help the industry evolve in the future, and it's from that angle that as an insurer, of course, our job is to protect our policyholders, in this case our end customers for air transport, but we're also involved in projects to prevent future risks. And it is from that angle that one of the companies in the AXA group, AXA Research Fund, is here to act as a charity to support a number of projects. What united us recently, over the last 10 years really, was to support Professor Frédéric Dehaye. Thomas was one of those students and also a startup founder on the aspects of neuroscience that he'll tell us more about. But we are here acting as a sponsor for air safety that we're happy to be involved today. That was the context. We understand why, as an insurer, as AXA XL, it's important to be a stakeholder in this research work. For prevention, as you said, have you got a few examples of applications for this research in aviation in particular, which is the matter at hand? Indeed, I would say that to connect directly with what this topic is about, we've realized how important pilots are. Well, it's a bit of a truism, but most accidents in the last few years were about human failure at some point, whereas in the 50s or 60s you were really talking about highly technical, either aircraft or engine related problems. From the moment the industry over the next 15 to 20 years is probably going to use new units, probably new engines for decarbonization of the industry, we can realize that the central role played by the pilot is going to be more and more important when faced with more and more complex systems. There is an agglomeration of more and more complex systems handled via computers. Therefore, it is important to have the computing power of AI in order to provide support and assistance to the pilot in a moment that is particularly interesting for us, which is the highly tense or stressful moment when faced with an unexpected event. We can observe that with the constant reduction, as I said, in the number of accidents per million hours of flight, we are more and more faced with unlikely cases for which there is no past experience that could not be modeled, and therefore pilots could not be trained ahead of time for that. That's why it's very important to support all this work to, at some point, bridge between the pilot, the unexpected event, and what we're all interested in as passengers before we're insurers, the reaction and the winning combination between man and machine to face unexpected events. Xavier de Jabrin, you're also leading experiments at Thales to develop what solutions? I think that the goals overlap in a way with those of Ludovic Berliou. Yes, absolutely. At Thales, we specialized in information sensors, secure information transmission, and decision support. Neuroscience and AI are a major challenge for us. We have a project for internal acceleration in the company, Cortex, spelled AIX at the end, to train pilots, help plan operations, and also conduct air operations. A concrete example immediately about training. Thales has been building simulators for a while, big bolts on hydraulic rams, and so we have a solution called Evidence that will provide evidence about good or bad responses from pilots when faced with a failure. So we'll analyze what they say, and good exchange of information between pilot and co-pilot will be automatically assigned a good rating. The absence of information that should have been communicated will immediately lead to a bad rating. Or we'll look at their eyes, and if they're both simultaneously looking at a screen, there's going to be a bad rating because one of them is supposed to be constantly looking out. So here we have a solution marrying AI and neuroscience with immediate use. Yes, it's very concrete, isn't it? Pilot training is a very strong avenue for your research work, as we understood. Thomas Bessières, indeed, this is a topic you've been working on at INFACT. You've been working on tools and solutions in this respect. What is it that you do? As Ludovic said, the human factor is still the part of flight safety that could largely be improved. What we're offering with INFACT for airlines is about training and training schools to better assess and characterize pilot skills throughout their lifetime, from initial training to their operational life, and offer adaptive training. Very stereotypically, a pilot's training is the same for all of them. They need to be in the simulator every 6 months to run a number of scenarios, but thanks to our solutions, we'll get all the data that we can analyze from flight operations, what's going on in flight, what's going on in previous simulator sessions 6 or 12 months ago. With all these data, we'll be able to analyze or characterize a pilot profile, and therefore the next simulator session will be adapted. We'll go from standard one-size-fits-all training to something a lot more bespoke and individualized. So we can take into account the fact that humans are different with their own strengths and weaknesses. And so it's very logical when you say it like that, but implementation is very complex for aviation, so we're making bespoke individualized training easier. We're also making skills characterization easier for pilots. What gaps are there in terms of communication or workload management? All those things that are fairly subjective will help airlines better identify and make that more objective to adapt training. Does that help them also have more relevant combinations in terms of complementarity? Coming back to what you were saying, Xavier de Jabrin. Yes, absolutely. We also want to leverage training data, but also data coming from a system that works well right now in airlines, which is the safety management system, where all data from all flights are collected to maybe identify weak signals, gaps in a pilot's skills, and so that will come and feed our profiling and adaptive training that will flow from that. I would like to continue with you, Clarisse Pamiès, with a question. It's often complementary. When you're an airline or an OEM, you cherry-pick solutions from your companies at Omind Neurotechnologies. What is your offering? In fact, we offer something similar to Thomas, but for all the people outside the cockpit. So cruise people making decisions. We work exclusively in the B2B world, but beyond aviation, we work in insurance, in the banking sector, with Accenture, in a lot of big firms that will train their directors and managers, help them better use what's going on between their ears. We know that we need that now because the world is more complex. We need to interact with tools. We need to better learn to use emotional intelligence in our relations, in our management, in our marketing practices. So for that, we use qualified solutions that we've created that are a direct translation from research. We've put together games, role-playing games, from which people get scores to get access to their own ways of working. And then it's great because from that, adaptively, you can build training programs, and that's what we do to help them get trained. And not everybody has the same needs. Not everybody has the same way of interacting with others. So maybe some will need to work on empathy, others on emotional management, others on more cognitive things. So that's what we can do with all these solutions that are really having a very well proven impact. Our competitors dispense traditional management or leadership training or coaching. Now we know that doing that with technology, an extra layer of technology, well, it's much nicer first because you breathe fresh air into the experience, you're closer to your business needs, but that also creates a lot of powerful impact on learnings. When we measure before and after, because it's measurable, plus 35% improvement on scores that we're trying to change. This from the quantification as point of view, it's very important. And so you're doing that via gamification and a behavioral analysis plus 35%. Okay, at the HinFact, you can also quantify the benefit of your solutions, can't you? Well, through various ways, because since we're developing two main solutions at HinFact, first, the training management system, which is really the entire solution that allows to manage all aspects of training in airlines for pilots, ground crew and cabin crew, and also the risk management system based on the occurrence rate that there can be on events or near misses. By improving training, bespoke training, now we can customize 40% of training, whereas in the past it was 0%. Through that, we can see a reduction in operational occurrences that is measurable and which is now giving positive impacts for airlines. And our clients, airlines, are using this adaptive training to improve safety, which is their number one challenge, but they can improve their efficiency as well. Because when you're talking about efficiency in piloting, you can have more efficient flights, they can follow better routes, make better decisions to reduce fuel consumption, but on that you can also see impacts on the fuel savings that our clients can make based on adaptive training. This is a major impact, yes. Yes, we'll come back to this other area. There's not just training, you're also optimizing flights and missions. Mark Baumgartner, we've been talking a lot about pilot training, but there's also air traffic controller training because they need to do their job well. That's all we want them to do when you're a passenger. This is a crucial challenge. You've been in air traffic control for 30 years. How has the job changed in 30 years? Our job has been changing along a cognitive axis. An air traffic controller, for them to do their job well, there are psychocognitive loads, stress. And when the load is too high, how can you face it? So we're putting strategies in place to help air traffic controllers identify conflicts at the beginning. When two aircraft are closing getting closer together, you need to manage that. In the past, we had little chits of paper. So cognitively, air traffic controllers move those chits of paper vertically or horizontally, and there's one chit per aircraft. And so in the past, we wanted people who had some talent. Therefore, we needed 800 applicants to have one certified air traffic controller. Now, with automation, we were able to reduce that first cognitive load. We could identify conflicts. With that, we've been using the first steps in automation, as I said before. We're feeding systems that report solutions back. But now there is another scale of complexity, being able to solve conflicts with a machine. And we're not there yet, but every time we've made such steps forward, we were able to reduce the cognitive load on the human person, and we could increase the number of planes. When I started 30 years ago, we had about 15 aircraft in a controlled sector. Now you can take it to 25 or 30 simultaneous aircraft. This is the kind of progress we've achieved, and we hope that once we also get conflict-solving assistance, then we'll be able to increase that number by 30%. A few figures: 17,000 ATCs in Europe. Now we need 700 to 800 more. 30% of people working now will retire in the next few years. So there's a very big challenge. Air traffic is growing by about 3% per annum globally. And densification depends a lot on various impacts, like the closure of Ukrainian airspace or Iranian airspace. So flows are shifting, but we're expecting 1 billion people will join the middle class and who will start flying globally. Hence, a fairly steady growth in the next 10 years. Behind you, we can see a slide that you'd sent us that's showing the change in air traffic control infrastructure, how much more digital it has become, so that we can understand one person, one air traffic controller was monitoring 15 flights simultaneously in airspace. Thanks to AI, thanks to assistance and automation, as you said, we can have a few more. And how long do you anticipate? How quickly could there be a risk before you change a trajectory? Well, I would like to dispel a few myths. There's very little AI in air traffic control, but a lot of automation. So based on what we saw earlier, there's a lot of applications in infrastructure maintenance. So we've got machine learning and artificial intelligence and infrastructure maintenance. But when it comes to the core business of air traffic controller, this is just the beginning. There's a European research project called CESAR, which is only beginning. And you realize it's not as easy as all that. An air traffic controller is like a craftsman working artisanally. So machines had to learn from humans to offer solutions, but you realize that it's not so easy. And there are also new challenges. Now with technology, that was the third pillar. If we've got time, we've got small regional towers with maybe 1 or 2 commercial shifts every day. And for the moment, you've got one air traffic controller in a control tower. With technology, you can centralize several airports in the same control room. And then suddenly, you can imagine that economically it makes sense to be able to say that an air traffic controller can control 1, 2, 3, or 4 airports at the same time. And suddenly, you're reaching psychocognitive limits. It's like trying to hold 2 phone calls simultaneously. So the human people and psychocognitive factors reach their limits very quickly. So we've understood that the growth in air traffic is going to cause some problems, and mechanically you'll need to recruit more controllers. And as Thomas Vessier said, it's not just about training, but also about flight optimization. Xavier de Jabrin, is that also something that Thales has been working on? You're doing simulators, but also mission optimization, right? Well, a few examples of development applications of neuroscience. Over a few days or weeks, we're working on ways to limit fatigue for crews, or even within a flight to plan tasks with neuroscience to see which are more tiresome than others, to maybe offer other tasks alternatively. We've made tests on Marine Patrol Atlantic 2 aircraft where you've got two people who can take turns over a 6-hour flight to optimize efficiency. That's a first example of neuroscience. Then coming back to logging a pilot's reactions over an exercise. We record a benchmark and we'll have them do the same exercise in flight to see whether they're as effective as in the control that we recorded. Another application more related to artificial intelligence, to reduce fatigue on an operator, maybe a traffic controller on an AWACS monitoring aircraft. They have headphones, so for hours and hours they're listening to blurry or garbled messages because there can be jamming in terms of electronic warfare. So what AI can do is listen to the message, filter out noise, and reintroduce a clear message because it was pre-interpreted. And here you greatly reduce tiredness for operators during the flight hours. One last example, which is also in development to marry artificial intelligence and neuroscience. Imagine a pilot looking to land on a poorly equipped airfield with very bad visibility. This is more for general aviation than an airfield that will have guidance mechanisms, but they'll try to see the landing strip, and AI can analyze the picture for him, and quite certainly it can see the outline of the runway before the pilot does. That's the contribution from AI. But then how can we pass on the idea with a good level of acceptance from the pilot? And this is where neuroscience kicks in, because you can suggest turn right by 30 degrees to be on target, or we can overlay the outline of the runway on their visor. And so that's what our research is here to do, to optimize the solution. Yes, it's very concrete. So I had a question about training and quantifying the benefit. You said that, Thomas Bessier, you were talking about less fuel consumed. Were you able to make very concrete comparisons in terms of savings on flights? Are you asking me? I'm asking Thomas Bessier or yourself. Whoever wants to speak first. Well, here I'll connect with another Thales solution, which is optimization of trajectories in flight, because we can have softer descents or ascents, and with development solutions we can anticipate congestion that will take place in 30 minutes. And so you can slow down or reroute aircraft to reduce delays. And with that we can optimize efficiency, and we can also limit CO2 emissions by 10 to 15% depending on flight duration. This is a very concrete and fairly short-term progress. Thomas, something you wanted to add? Well, yes, there are quite a few solutions on the market to analyze flights and see where the areas of improvement are, at least in terms of fuel reduction for some routes or flight phases. What the software identifies are limits in terms of pilot decisions. There are decisions that can be made by pilots that are not made because of lack of communication or information that's sent too late during a flight, and that's where training between instructor and pilot can have an impact, because it's about passing on knowledge. It was identified that in your last 5 flights you could have pulled in the flaps or lower the flaps a bit earlier. That type of almost bespoke adaptive training will help us get some major improvements by about 5% just because of that. Ludovic Berliou, you talked about some data that you had about the reduction in losses, in claims. Yes, I think there was a graph that we expected to show We don't necessarily have it, but you're going to tell us yourself. Yes, it's true that the last few events, unfortunately, have reminded us that, well, there was a study that was published in the 90s regarding the social acceptability of air transport vis-à-vis the harmful perceived consequences. All that is a polite way of saying that the conclusion was that if you had one crash every quarter shown on global television, there would come a point when the industry would no longer be able to address demands for safety from passengers. And we can see that over the last 20 to 30 years, all the work done by the industry to work on first on technologies that I would call basic technologies. So mountain detection technologies. Then you've got high effectiveness collision detection systems, aircraft to aircraft communication in the latest generation so that conflicts can be managed themselves, taken over both air traffic control but also pilot actions. All that has led to, I would say, an improvement in the industry, and the entire ecosystem generally has reached an acceptability level so that every one of us will hop on a flight without asking the hostess or steward whether the plane is well insured. However, the next challenge is, well, we're talking about technology, innovation, neuroscience, artificial intelligence. We've seen that there was mostly the human factor. And if I can dig a bit deeper on that, the basis of confidence and trust in any system is whether you trust people over the long term. And the entire debate for us in our insurance models, because our job is to provide capital to protect a policyholder in their operations in particular, to know whether past trust is going to be the same in the future. This is precisely where this technological breakthrough that we're seeing coming onto the market with better trained pilots, and especially pilots who are better perceived by the machines that they operate. Well, as a supporting factor in the industry, how can we recalibrate our models based on what we're seeing arriving on the market with a fairly idealized system? So far, people have adapted to the machine, but now the entire ambition is to make sure that machines will adapt to humans, and not humans generically, but specifically to a given human being operating a given machine in given circumstances. This is really what we're working on. And based on the image that the insurance and community and the market has, and we can all admit that today, it was proven in a previous discussion, we are always depicted as trying to shirk our responsibilities and taking immediate reactions. Well, no, here it's the opposite. We're anticipating things with the industry so that together we can provide transport and insurance solutions that are ever more resilient.
Right, with all these developments, all these innovations seem to be going the right way, but nonetheless, and I imagine, there's a risk inherent in all that, isn't there? Should you be particularly cautious when you're adding layers upon layers of technology, and because after all there are risks of hacking, of malware, and there's an issue of cybersecurity, isn't there? Especially for air traffic control. That sort of technology could turn against the air traffic control. Maybe not. You tell me. Well, look, I always try and look at the development of air traffic controller and the development of the air industry. We are still in the age of the Minitel, the ancestor of the internet, but we're told that we can be in a position to download the App Store apps on our old Minitel. So you have to create a smartphone to upgrade our smartphone to be able to get the information available to the air traffic controller. I mean, that's where we stand in technology. I mean, we have old hardware for new software. But we find emergent properties constantly, things that nobody could predict. Suddenly you have things that are connected, but because there you have a digital infrastructure which goes beyond air traffic controller. I mean, you could see, for instance, that there was the blackout in Spain and Portugal. That's because of the new digital technologies that failed, and so we have the same issues. And aircraft manufacturers have found a way to address this, but what happens is you get software upgrades, and suddenly overnight you'll get you have an engine software just stopping at 100,000 feet up in the air, whereas the previous version of the software was running perfectly well. I mean, sometimes the upgrades can have unexpected and negative effects. All right, I see what you're saying, but are we moving fast enough? I mean, air traffic is bound to grow rapidly, and I don't know who can address this, but are we swift enough to support the development of air traffic? Well, that's a good point, and I can confirm what was just said. At ITFAC, we started transferring the work of our, all the project conducted at the Neuroscience Institute. We worked with AXA there. We can measure the eye activity of the pilot. I mean, all sort of technologies can help characterize the pilot's performance, but we found ourselves in an ecosystem where airlines are not digitalized. There's lots of paperwork, and they already have a hard time just keeping up with the regulations. So there we are, providing state-of-the-art digital technology that is way ahead of the game, because in practice the airlines are still stuck to very old protocols. So while the technology is there, it is still for these airlines and aircraft manufacturers to upgrade their own technologies, and we have what is known as technological bridges that can enable them to make leaps ahead. But unfortunately, as we find, not just in Europe and elsewhere as well, there's lots of stuff where the ecosystem is not digitalized, so we haven't got the right foundations, and so therefore all these technological accelerators, generative IA, just is not ready to accommodate all this. I mean, the technology is out there, but they're simply they haven't got the wherewithal to receive it. Clarisse, what's your view? Well, air transport I'm less familiar with, because I deal with insurance in a broader spectrum, but there is an issue there. I mean, it's all very interesting to see how the human brain works. The human brain is no longer a complete black box. There's some things that we know. There have been hundreds of thousands of papers and publications on neurotechnologies. I mean, we know how to handle data. That's all very well, but then you have people providing training sessions in a company using tools that date back to the 1950s. These are very empirical tools, and they're not at all modern in technological terms. So there is this disconnect there. Yes, and then there's another aspect. How much can you trust AI? Because we had AIs that made delirious statements, and so there's a need for transparency around that. That's why Thales in particular is working hard to make sure that artificial intelligence itself should be understandable, certifiable, so that critical applications such as air traffic control or aircraft flying shouldn't suffer from these risks. I mean, you don't want AIs that you can use on the internet for other benign users. You don't want to have an uncertain technology out there. So technology is going the right way, but on the one hand, some people are a bit diffident about new technologies. They hesitate, and then not everybody's ready anyway. But at the end of the day, you want to improve air safety. If we can get the technology ready, can this bring the costs of insurance down? Well, by definition, insurance will always seem too expensive. It depends on whose viewpoint you are. But having said that, we get to the point where, especially for air transport, the fundamental issue is that technological developments are necessary because over and beyond what the industry can do for decarbonization, for making air transport available to the general public, make it democratize air transport. You're looking at what, 6 billion, maybe 8 billion passengers by 2050. I mean, well, for that to happen, you need to scale things up, don't you? Because right now, I mean, the risks can grow indefinitely, because if you have more and more flight hours, what happened is that you have models that are keeping up with all this. But mathematically, the risk is infinite at the end. And so that's working with ICAO. ICAO is the specialized UN agency for civil aviation. There's this tool called Safety 2, where the latest generation of safety, which is supposed to be a paradigm change, because you have, well, the airline industry that started in the 1950s, but it resulted from an accumulation of knowledge based on previous events, based on experience, and especially when there were all sorts of claims and corrections and accidents that were understood and analyzed. Now there's predictability. So if you, I mean, using all the sensors that are present on aircraft and aircraft engines in particular, you can build models, digital models, and using with artificial intelligence that has powerful computational capabilities, now you can do all sorts of things. So if you want to check this aircraft engine after a few thousands of hours of flight, you can certainly make things easier, faster, and you can use faint signals. And something might tell you, aha, don't wait 6 months for the next overhaul. And this comes preventive maintenance can prevent precisely accidents in the future, or more bigger problems. So that's the contribution of new technologies, of new digital technologies. You can be more agile, more predictive. But that has, for this to work, it has to apply across the vertical, across the entire chain. And for us as service providers, as insurers, we find that our models have been working for the past 50 years using the same technology. And now, in the new context, what will the new models be? Especially for, I mean, we need to define our own models based on our customers' models, and that will help us define not just the premiums, but capital allocation. I mean, the whole contract or contractual arrangements should be win-win. I mean, in the long run, we want our policyholders to benefit from this in the long run. We don't want to put them in a difficult financial position, but we're looking at growth in air traffic, but we are facing a technological wall by 2035, 2050. Apart from decarbonized aircraft engine, by the way, Mr. Fauré, the CEO of Airbus, said that the next technology will be postponed. We don't know what kind of aircraft we will be flying 20 years down the road. Well, that means we'll have lots of things to discuss for the next editions of Paris Met. Well, thank you for these explanations, and you deserve a round of applause. And now we'll give the floor to Cécile Desjardins, because in a couple of minutes we will be presenting the